We are here to discuss the HiFiMAN Arya Unveiled. I'm joined by GoldenSound, and we are going to be giving you guys our review, both of our takes in one video, just to kind of mix things up a little bit. We've had a chance to listen to these headphones for a little bit now, and actually, we don't know if we agree. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. So first, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the fact that these headphones, along with the others in this series, don't have a grill on them. They give you these covers, magnetic covers, and the covers this time around look kind of cool, I think. They have this sort of like carbon fiber-y print on the one side. But yeah, the elephant in the room here is that these are essentially naked drivers to the world. And in the past, when we did our video on the Susvara Unveiled, that for me was a bit of a disqualifier. With these ones, I'm curious what you think about this. But for me, with these ones, I'm kind of over it because the magnets kind of function like a bit of a grill because they're a lot closer in their spacing.
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, the first thing and the biggest benefit for me personally is just the fact that the covers on these stay on. The Susvara Unveiled had a little bit of a habit of the covers falling off if you breathed on them slightly too hard or just looked at them funny. Whereas these, they're not going anywhere. You can give the headphone a bit of a shake and it's going to stay on. So whatever they've done, the covers stay on a lot better, which is nice. The Susvara Unveiled, I had to be really careful how I was picking it up or else the covers would just fall off and hit something. I don't really mind the Unveiled aspect of the Susvara Unveiled either. It's definitely a little bit more sketchy than the approach here. If for anything, a friend of mine actually ended up puncturing his Susvara Unveiled driver because he was holding the cable near it whilst he was unplugging the other one, and the 3.5mm connector went straight through the driver because the gaps between the magnets are more than big enough to allow that. Whereas here, as you mentioned, they're quite a bit closer to each other. It's a lot harder to actually get something in between them and touch the driver itself. Still gonna suck through any little pieces of metal fragments or something, so don't go unscrewing stuff at the same desk that you're going to be placing these down on. I don't really feel it makes too much difference.
I had to put the screws back in these Sundara clothes because I'd taken the cups off before doing this video because I was like, I don't want to be messing with loose screws while I'm having the cups taken off or having the little bits taken off of the Unveiled here because that could get yeeted through.
With all of these Unveiled headphones here at the moment, I've taken to just anytime I need to open something, I've got a dedicated desk, which I'm doing that at now, and headphones do not go on it just because I am a little nervous about it. Yeah, it's still going to have the same risk, I think, for small metal fragments and stuff like that, but it does mean that it's going to stop like connectors and things from going through. I think the end answer really is just be careful with either of them. I don't really feel that it's a problem as long as you are not being careless with your very expensive headphones. So I don't really mind too much, but it is a slight improvement nonetheless.
How do you feel about the looks, the sort of silver magnets contrasting with the black?
So my take on the build is a little bit mixed in that I think that this looks great. I really, really like the aesthetics of it. And in fact, I like the look of this more than the HE1000 Unveiled. I think the sort of gloss black finish, the piano black finish, does really, really work. However, I don't like the feel of it. It feels quite plasticky. So in terms of the feel of construction, I'm not super keen on it. When I'm just looking at it though, I really like it. So a little bit mixed.
Yeah, no, for me it's about the same. This outside bit kind of feels a bit plasticky, and it does take a lot of fingerprints, or it gets a lot of fingerprints.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you've noticed that on your unit.
It definitely gets some fingerprints.
So it can start to look. Yeah, it can start to look a little bit less good if you're just kind of like handling it, which I didn't notice on the HE1000 Unveiled. But as far as like the contrast, silver and black, it looks quite striking. I do have a criticism, like generally of this style, and it's just that like it's the same style headband as all of them. Like they've always had this kind of like the Arya series and HE1000 series. It's a very similar look, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But there just isn't any innovation as far as the rest of the design here is concerned whatsoever. All of the innovation here has taken place with the acoustics of it, right?
I'm not too mad about that, to be honest. I have massive head syndrome.
Because it works.
And so, yeah, it works.
It fits, right? Yeah.
It fits very comfortably.
Yeah.
This is one of the few headphones where not only does it actually fit my massive head, I've got a notch to spare. So that plus the suspension style strap means that for me, these are exceptionally comfortable headphones. The Arya and HE1000 line has always been one of the most comfortable headphones for me, probably the most comfortable headphone for me personally. So I'm not mad at all that they haven't changed the headband. In fact, whilst people can criticize this for it not being an overly complex or luxury feeling construction. You know, if you look at this headband versus that of a Meze Empyrean Elite or something like that, the Meze headband is definitely nicer in terms of how premium it looks and feels, but this is really, really comfy and it works, so I don't mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. People are more prone to feeling better about the things that look extra luxurious, and this just doesn't.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't necessarily detract away from the fact that its comfort is still excellent, the way that it always has been. And the sound is what it is, and it is what we should get into next. Actually, before we do that, do you have any thoughts on like the drivability? You're much more into the whole source side of things than I am. I don't get into the DACs and amps thing. Did you play around with switching that out a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. These aren't super hard to drive. The Susvara Original is the one headphone which I do find does change to me quite noticeably depending on the amp that it's running on, and it is a headphone which demands a very significant level of current compared to most other headphones, which even if your amp can deliver, say, 6 watts, but you're needing 1 watt to drive the headphones, a lot of amps will be distorting significantly more at 1 or 2 watts output, even if they can deliver 6 watts. Whereas these, you're going to be sitting at very low levels anyway. They are quite easy to drive, and so the actual amp that you're using to drive these, you don't need anything crazy powerful. They're not that demanding.
We could put the power calculator on the screen.
Yeah, I'll show that here with 110 dB just to make sure that you can absolutely cover any kind of bassy profile that you might be running.
All right, so we're going to get into the sound quality here, but just before we do, one thing I want folks to remember is that all of this is made possible by headphones.com. If you like what we're doing here and you want to support us, remember to check out headphones.com for your next audio purchase. There's a ridiculous, massive 365-day return policy. There's also excellent customer service, as you can see from our good friend Sam right here. So definitely keep us in mind the next time you're considering buying a new headphone or related audio product. So the sound. I think this is where we might actually disagree.
Okay, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, because we've intentionally not spoken too much about this until filming this, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I put out a video actually not that long ago titled, maybe controversially, The Truth About Sound Quality in Headphones. A lot of this headphone makes me think of that video, and to me, the interesting things about this headphone relate much more to that than they do, I think, just when it comes to like, you know, answering the question of like, is this good sound quality? Is it bad sound quality? But first and foremost, to me, this is a headphone that it actually agrees very well with my HRTF above 6 kilohertz. And so subjectively to me, I perceive that as being very good for both detail and timbre, right? Yeah. I hear this as sounding very natural while also sounding very resolving. And this is actually better than the other headphones in this series were for me. And that's specifically to do with the treble above 6 kilohertz, right? That's where the fine-grained features for this headphone absolutely nail it for me. With that said, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues here as well. So I would actually say that the timbre is not its strong suit right out the gate without EQ. And this is where it requires a little bit of nuance. But again, I just want to stress that for me, the subjective aspects to this is that this has the potential to be one of the better sounding headphones for the subjective qualities. That sense of resolution, that sort of sense of unveiling, like no pun intended. Well, maybe a little bit of pun intended. And also timbre. But in order to get that timbre, I really did need to EQ. And I know that some people are going to have trouble with that, but please stick with me on this because this is really where the nuance is.
So I think actually we're surprisingly quite aligned on it. At the upper treble, this is probably, I would say maybe the best besides the original Susvara in terms of how well it fits my particular HRTF. The upper treble profile on this is the best I've heard in the entire HE1000 line for sure, but also agree that the 5 kilohertz region specifically is a little bit too spicy. Really easy to EQ it down, and once you do, this is probably one of the best HiFiMAN headphones I've heard, and definitely my favorite in the entire HE1000 and Arya line. So out of the box, the two slight complaints I have is that the 3 kilohertz region is like slightly lower, which is nice because I like a slightly lower 3 kilohertz than what a lot of headphones tend to have. But the fact that the 3 kilohertz is a little bit lower and then it goes up into that sort of 5 kilohertz spike means that that 5 kilohertz bit is even more obvious than it otherwise would be. Overall, the detail retrieval on this, that's the one bit I disagree with. I don't find these to be particularly detailed in comparison to, I would say actually the HE1000 Unveiled, potentially just because those are a bit brighter. The past sort of 4 kilohertz or so, those definitely go up a little bit more. But I think that actually a lot of it's down to the slightly lower 3 kilohertz region, making them sound potentially a little bit less forward. Some people are going to like that, but it does harm perceived detail ever so slightly for me.
Yeah, I was actually going to say this is why I kind of relate this back to that video that I did about, the truth about sound quality, where one of the components there for how many of us will sort of attach meaning to, things like detail or technicalities can vary in the sense that for me, it might be more agreement with my HRTF and just sounding like perfectly balanced with what my brain sort of expects sound to be at my eardrum. But for somebody else, it might be that there's a sense of the tasteful coloration of editorialization on the sound that we might be looking for, right? That we might, want to have, again, as you said with the HE1000 Unveiled, it is just a little bit brighter there in the upper treble. And that might be the thing that imparts that extra sense of like air that is more than what you get on the Arya Unveiled. There are going to be differences as far as how these headphones perform and how they measure throughout. When we're talking about things like technicalities, detail, resolution, we are talking about frequency response at the eardrum. We're not talking about an additional unmeasurable thing that we know of, right? Because again, all of this is conjecture, but it's the best place to look and the most likely reason. The problem is that we don't have a strong grasp of what the analysis of the data should be for these qualities, for these subjective effects that we get. And so it's difficult to say, universally for everybody, this is going to be more detailed or less detailed. I'm saying that as one example. It could apply to any of the rest of the frequency response that we're talking about here, right? Is there anything else about this subjectively? You like to get more into soundstage than I do.
Yeah.
How do you find this for spaciousness?
So I would say that the spaciousness in soundstage is overall very good. It's not quite as big as either the Arya Stealth was or the actual original Arya, which you can't buy anymore. And I think a lot of that's just down to the fact that those had quite a more prominent 2 kilohertz dip. That tends to increase spaciousness. These aren't quite as big as those or as airy as those. So I think these are a little bit lower in upper treble, correct me if I'm wrong, than those were as well. But the timbre on these, once you fix the 5 kilohertz, is better than those. So it's a trade-off in terms of spaciousness versus timbre, which is fairly common. These, once you fix that 5 kilohertz bit, overall have a much more realistic profile, I would say. The timbre for both vocals and pretty much any instrument is more realistic, but they aren't quite as impressively spacious as the original Arya V2 or the Arya Stealth was. The Arya Organic, I'm not really a fan of just because they are just too bright for me. Those are going for quite a different tuning, I feel like. Those are the most different out of any of the Arya line, I would say. And so I'm not really making comparisons to that just because that headphone wasn't for me, and it's quite V-shaped overall.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Or U-shaped, I think we call it, right?
Yeah.
Overall, I would say this is one of, if not the most balanced sounding Aryas, period. Like out of all of the Aryas, I don't find it quite as bright as some of the other ones like the Arya Stealth or the Organic. I don't find it quite as bright as some of the HE1000s that are out there. Certainly this is not to my ear as bright as the HE1000 Unveiled even. And so for me, this has some of the best balance. I will say that I think some of the other ones that fill in that mid-range a little bit more, I noticed that the textural qualities for certain instrument tones come across a little bit more, but it's not like they're missing here. They're just a little bit, again, further back because of that sort of the wideband kind of like 1 to 3 kilohertz dip. One of the trends that I see with this unveiling here is just a better balance overall, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be preferred by everybody. So like I personally prefer the sound that you get from the unveiling of things, not necessarily for the Susvara Unveiled, but for the HE1000 and the Arya Unveiled. But again, I could see somebody wanting to go the other way. So I don't think it's a universal, like this is more bigger stagey because it is lacking grills or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I do prefer the spaciousness presentation on the earlier Aryas, the Arya V1, V2, and Stealth. But these do timbre better once you fix the 5K. And a lot of that is just a trade-off that comes with filling in that 2 kilohertz dip. If you have more of a 2 kilohertz dip, things get thinner, things get less timbrally accurate, but they can be bigger and more airy and spacious sounding, hence why a lot of manufacturers choose to do that. But then once you fill it in, timbre gets better, but you might lose, or you might get a more intimate presentation overall. These still stage well. These are not an intimate sounding headphone. These still stage really, really nicely. It's just not quite as drastic as the earlier ones. But overall, I do prefer this presentation. I think that the trade-off is worth it in this instance.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was actually going to talk a little bit about the Susvara Unveiled, well, just all the unveiled versions. The trend for these headphones seems to be that there is less of that mid-range dip. Like the mid-range dip is still there, but it's like less. Slightly filled in a bit. So it's a little bit of a more complete or cohesive or fuller presentation, richer presentation overall for all of the Unveileds. I think if anything, removing the grill seems to have that effect.
One thing that we probably should do, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is putting some grills back on, like the Susvara Unveiled, and seeing how it changes. That is something that's probably worth doing, so get subscribed. We might put a short out on that, because yeah, that'll separate what is the grill versus what is all the other changes to not just the driver, but the actual physical construction of the outer area as well, because this is vented, and this is going to have an effect on how and where the driver is damped. So this, putting a normal grill back over it, it'll be interesting to see how it changes or does not change potentially. And I do wonder how much of the changes that they've achieved could have still been achieved whilst keeping a grill on it. Yeah, there's definitely some debate as to how much of this is actually due to the unveiling rather than all the other changes that have gone on in the headphone.
Exactly. And with that in mind, I do want to note as well with some of the data here, one area where the Arya Unveiled is actually better than many of the other egg-shaped ones that I've seen is actually to do with harmonic distortion. At least this unit seems to be very good for this in comparison. The only harmonic distortion products that I could see here were quite low order, even at very high volumes. It's not as good as what you find with the Odyssey headphones, so that's kind of unsurprising, and it's not the best that you can get in planars. But this series of headphone wasn't necessarily the best for harmonic distortion, right? So some of the other ones in the past, because it has a more modal driver, again, I keep using that word, people don't know what that word means, I realize, but sometimes you'd have slightly higher harmonic distortion. With this one, it seems to be kept well in check. So I measured the harmonic distortion here at various different volumes, and distortion is related to level. So, I measured it at, 105, 110 dB, and still didn't have any problems. So you shouldn't have any issues there.
So if you want to throw a big bass shelf on it, that's no problem.
Yeah, bass shelf is no problem. You can do that. The other thing is that it also has a low resonance frequency, just like all the rest of them do, which means that if for whatever reason you're not getting a great seal, because these are very huge cups, right? Like the bottom, for some people, it would protrude down past their jaw. Yeah, with these headphones, that actually causes a bass boost. And because the resonance frequency is so low, it doesn't result in losing all of the bass. So that's nice. But yeah, as far as the data is concerned, this is mostly really, really good. It's mostly exceptional. The only real scrungle there is right at around 5 kilohertz. For some people, it might be a bit excessive there. And certainly that's what I EQ. I will leave an EQ profile in the description for folks who want to try that. Keep in mind, I also add a bass boost to this because I like bass. I like having a little bit more bass there. I don't know about you, Cameron, but for me, with all these sort of HiFiMAN headphones, that's kind of the way that I approach this. And the nuance here is that, because people will always say like, oh, if you have to EQ the headphone, then, it's a bad headphone. Well, yeah, but I'm not doing this because I feel I have to do this. I'm adding a bass shelf because I like more bass. So that's, to me, always the thing with these headphones.
I could happily listen to these without any EQ, but I'm using the Zal HM1, and it's got treble and bass EQ right there. Yeah. So I just click up the bass, usually just one notch. I don't need much or anything, and I prefer that. But yeah, no, they're totally fine without it. It's just I prefer a slightly elevated bass profile as well.
The main thing with the data, with the graphs that I want to highlight with this, I've commented before on this, that this is good in ways that I feel like people don't quite understand. It has to do with its consistency as a function of its design. So this is a headphone that I suspect, I'm going to be very careful with my language here, I suspect is going to perform fairly consistently across different heads. Yes, it is low acoustic impedance, but the bigger factor here is that it is also just the way that this, with these huge cups and the way that it sits on the head is going to be fairly consistent, with the exception of, for people who have leakage effects if it protrudes down past their jaw. But we're talking about the higher frequency stuff here. The other thing about this is that above 6 kilohertz, it's very, very good in ways that most other headphones are not. So when I say, and Cameron, maybe, I'm not sure if you agree with this, but when I say this is something where I like it with EQ, I'm not saying anything goes. I'm not saying this is the same as other headphones where I have to EQ them. I'm saying this is good in ways that other headphones are often bad. And where this is less than ideal, specifically around 5 kilohertz, it's much easier to make that adjustment than it is to start, trying to read the tea leaves in the upper treble, because as for folks who are unaware, when you're looking at a graph, it's all about probability. It's all about trying to predict how this response is going to be for you, and it's almost guaranteed not to be identical to how it is at your eardrum. But that's what's kind of special about this one, is that for the areas where, it maybe could be improved, like for example, we could boost the 1 to 3 kilohertz region a little bit with EQ. We could fill that in a little bit more, say, or reduce that 5 kilohertz region. These are much easier and more predictable things for people than having to dig into the fine-grained stuff for the HRTF matching above that. That's my position on this headphone. It requires a little bit of nuance to understand. I don't think people are really going to get that when they look at this graph. They're not going to quite realize just what this is and how good this is for its behavior above 6 kilohertz and why that's special.
Yeah.
Because they're going to take away from it, oh, it's only good with EQ, so it's disqualified. Well, if you don't EQ headphones, I think you can get better headphones for less money. I think you can get better sounding headphones for less money. If you're never going to EQ anything, I think it's entirely possible. I've said this before, I have yet to find a single headphone that I couldn't improve with EQ. And so to me, it's like, I see no reason why we wouldn't do that. Anyways, what's your take on that?
Reviewing headphones with or without EQ is kind of an interesting question, because I agree that, there's not really any headphone I know of where I wouldn't do some EQ. The only exception potentially being the Aperio GSE, because I literally tuned it on my head anyway, so it's already got everything built in. But then other people using it may find that there's EQ aspects that they would want to change. That's just because I tuned it. But at the same time, the thing with EQing headphones, or whether you should review headphones with or without EQ, kind of for me comes down to how easy is it? Like, I don't really mind if I need to add a bass shelf to a headphone. For me, adding a bass shelf is no problem, and that doesn't at all disqualify a headphone from being good, even if it's really bass light out of the box, because it's so easy to just fix that. If a headphone has a really complicated and weird treble profile that is a nightmare to fix, and potentially doesn't behave on your head in any way like what you see on the graph, that is a problem, because even though you probably can EQ it if you spend hours doing so, it's very difficult to do so, and it's also very hard to give information to the viewer to say, just do this, and then it's fine. Whereas here, so the upper treble, the stuff that is usually most difficult to fix, is really good and seems to be way more consistent across heads. Both you and I said that the 6 kilohertz and above stuff is excellent. And that's the stuff that usually, when you look at a graph, you basically just have to ignore because it's going to be different on your head. So yeah, it kind of comes down to me as to how easy is it to EQ and what are the kind of complex adjustments that you're needing to be doing. If you just need a very simple adjustment, be it a single peak or notch filter or a single bass shelf or something, that's fine. If you need to completely unscrew the treble, that's not fine. That's a bad headphone.
Yeah. So with that said, say you couldn't EQ anything. Do you feel that the Arya Unveiled is competitive at its asking price? Because obviously with EQ, we think it's amazing.
If you're not willing to EQ anything, personally, I would get the Arya Stealth. I think that the ear gain region on the Arya Stealth for me is quite a bit better out of the box.
It's also way cheaper though, right? Like it's like a half the price or less.
I'm not sure. I think it was on sale for about $600, which if you can get it for $600, oh my god, go get it. That's a good value. I think that sale may have ended now though. But yeah, like out of the box, if you are not willing to do any EQ whatsoever, either the Arya Stealth or in fact I would say the HE1000 Unveiled are better headphones. But if you are willing to do just a really simple EQ adjustment, these can be made very easily to be better than either of those. So it depends on whether you're willing to EQ or not. If you're not willing to EQ, then no, the 5 kilohertz region is objectionable, but it's so easy to fix that if you're spending this much money and you're not willing to do that, to get a, just in my opinion, outright better headphone once you have done that, that's kind of dumb. Well,
the other side of it too, though, is that like we're noticing the 5 kilohertz thing. There is no guarantee that that's going to be there for everybody. It's, plausible that it's there for most people. We have a certain amount of indication that it's there, but we know that the headphone response can vary across different heads. We know that HRTFs vary. We know that ears vary. I don't want to say that everybody, needs to do this to make it palatable. I'm just saying that for me, and I imagine you agree, and also confirmed by the measurement rigs as well, these are the adjustments that I make. And that's really that simple, right? Like, and as far as like the question of like, does it need EQ? I think it really just depends on where your threshold is for trying for that particular region, right? For some people, they just might not be as sensitive, or they may have a preference for more energy there. With that said, Arya Unveiled, like, is it competitive without EQ? I think it's competitive with the other egg-shaped HiFiMAN headphones. I think it's one of the better ones, if not the best one. At the same time, if I consider like the landscape of headphones overall, and just apply this like, to the average person if they're never going to EQ anything, I think you have to be okay with a little bit of excess energy at 5 kilohertz for this to be the leading candidate at that price point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's going to vary depending on the listener. And you're right in that there aren't many headphones I can think of at all They don't have something that I would try and fix. Again, you should be EQing headphones. And bear in mind that when we're talking about this stuff, it sounds like we might be being quite negative. But a lot of that is not us being negative about the product. We are very excited about this, and we're being quite positive. It's just that if you get used to EQing headphones and learning to identify where some of these slight oddities or objectionable characteristics are in any headphone and knowing how to fix them, your kind of bar gets raised, I would say. And I would say beyond
Completely.
what basically any headphone is able to deliver stock. And so that's why we talk about it so much.
And so with that said, I mean, as far as the acoustics of this product are concerned, right? This is the most excited about a headphone that I have been in a very long time. At its price point, it's definitely the headphone that I would choose today. And I say that full stop because not only is it exceptional for its sound quality, it's also very comfortable. If I could just have one headphone,
Andrew's feeling joy.
I'm feeling joy. If I could have one headphone, I actually think this might be it. Like if I was locked in to one headphone, I think this might be it.
Yeah.
Because of how it functions as a platform for good sound. It is one of the best that exists. And again, people won't understand this. It doesn't matter how much I talk about this, about how something this good above 6 kilohertz is rare and almost never happens.
Yeah.
But as to like whether I can recommend this to people, it really is going to come down to whether somebody's willing to make that adjustment. I think that's it, right? Like as a product to recommend, maybe it depends on you.
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of rare that you and I have very, very similar opinions on a headphone because of the things that this does well that other headphones don't do well and are so much harder to fix. If you are willing to just EQ the 5 kilohertz down a little bit, get this and be very happy.
And be done.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question for you. We were talking about it earlier.
Okay.
Arya Unveiled or HE1000 Unveiled? What's your pick?
Arya Unveiled, if you're willing to EQ. I think the HE1000 Unveiled for
I
me
agree.
it's close. They're very similar overall, but I feel that the upper treble stuff on the Arya Unveiled is just better. This feels a little bit less refined, for lack of a better term, in the upper treble stuff. I like the ear gain region presentation on this more out of the box. This one's got a little bit more balanced to the 3 kilohertz and doesn't have the 5 kilohertz thing going on.
Now, here's the bigger question. Arya Unveiled or Susvara Unveiled?
I still like the Susvara OGN Unveiled more. If you have the budget for it, I would still say that the Susvara is the better headphone. But it's not a big difference, and this is a hell of a lot less money.
So here's where I get spicy.
Oh, okay.
For me, it's the Arya Unveiled. I go
wow.
Arya Unveiled over Susvara Unveiled for two reasons. Well, one is obviously I have less nervosa about the grill, less anxiety about the grill, because the magnet spacing. But the other reason is, in both cases, I would end up EQing. The Susvara Unveiled was more about the 6 kilohertz forwardness, and at that point, they're both quite good above 6 kilohertz. I actually do feel that I prefer the balance for the mid treble and upper treble on the Arya Unveiled compared to the Susvara Unveiled. So for me, this really speaks to the whole bit about, technicalities, detail, resolution. Like once you get into EQ and you're able to make adjustments, once you're able to personalize it in the right way for yourself, it kind of reveals that this is what we're talking about. I want to say that it doesn't rob the experience of that effect. It just makes it so that you can achieve better with more products. With the Arya Unveiled, I hope at least that it leads people to be able to get to those experiences because it's so much easier to do, right? That's why I'm so high on this product right now. For all these other products, it's like there's always a caveat there of like, but you didn't match exactly this for your HRTF, blah, blah, blah. And it still exists for the Arya Unveiled. It's just that it is more likely to be better for more people with fewer adjustments. And so that's, this, people are going to hate this review, but that's just how it is. Like that's for me, at least.
It's exciting. And yeah, this is the most excited about a headphone I've heard you in quite a while, and I totally get why.
So okay, here's the question. How many of the comments are going to be, oh, this is basically just apologizing for the headphone's flaws and saying that you can just EQ it and that it's good with EQ, but it's bad otherwise?
There's going to be a lot, and if I totally understand if you don't want to use EQ. I personally think that you're missing out if you don't. If you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a headphone setup and ignoring something which can give you such a massive benefit because you don't want to use an extra tool. It's like buying a really, really nice car and then cheaping out on the tires. Just get good tires. You're bottlenecking the performance of this really nice car because you didn't want to do that one little thing.
See, my analogy was, it's like complaining about your food not having enough salt on it when you have salt freely available right in front of you.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
But okay, that basically does it for this review. I don't know. I'm quite high on this headphone, but that's because of my use case. I don't imagine that that's going to be the case for everybody, and so I have to say that with the big asterisk there, that if you are not like me, if you're not the kind of person who is willing to get into that, it is not better than necessarily other things that you can get at a similar price point and have been able to get for a while, right? So that basically concludes the review. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I just wanted to reiterate one thing, which is that, oh my god, these are so comfortable. I get why people complain about the headband styling or construction, but when they're this comfy, especially for people like me with big heads, these are probably the most comfortable. The HE1000 line and Arya line is the most comfortable headphones for me out of pretty much anything other than, I would say, the Sennheiser HE1.
Do you have any particular tracks that you like with this headphone, or just do you like all your music?
I've been listening to Thylacine stuff a lot recently. I've been getting back into that again. Thylacine's and 74 Musicians album, which I'll leave a link to in the description. I've been going through that quite a bit.
I recently actually just put together a new playlist. Maybe we can link that for folks. I call it Resolves Tracks for Fun. And it's just stuff that I think sounds cool on headphones. So for me, it's been the Polyphia. Some of that stuff that has like that really sort of like intense tactile kind of sound. Instrumental, but somewhat electronic. I don't know how else to describe it. It's really, really cool sounding. So it's been a lot of fun with that.
It's very arpeggiated. Yeah, Polyphia is also great live. I saw them live, and you would think with their style of music and just how complex some of the stuff that they're playing is, that a lot of it would be simplified for live stuff. No, it was all exactly as it was, or more complicated just for the sake of showing off, and they did not miss a single beat the entire show. Unbelievable talent, those people. Yeah, brilliant.
Cool. That does it for the review of the Arya Unveiled. Once again, I want to reiterate that the things that we are saying here are conjecture, but there's good reasons to conjecture, and things point in this direction.
So, hopefully you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you've got any questions that you wanted to ask about the HiFiMAN Arya Unveiled, HE1000 Unveiled, Susvara Unveiled, any other headphone, music, gear, then come and say hey on the Headphones.com forum or the Headphones.com Discord server, where I, Andrew, and other wiggly air enthusiasts will endeavor to help. Till next time, thanks for watching.